Let's not start with this line of questioning.
Actually, I'm going to start with this line of questioning. If you've got no idea how many civilians you killed, why should I believe a word about the numbers of Hamas? Wow! Yeah, I'm obsessed with how many civilians are being killed.
You and I have eyes. The world has eyes. We have seen Rafah get bombed. She represents the general psychopathy of the Israeli government. Sometimes, when you invite me to debate, I sit here and go, I don't have to say a word.
When you bomb a refugee camp, that is a strategy. International aid organizations and Israel's biggest allies have warned in unison for months, in no uncertain terms, that attacking Rafah would cross a red line. But Israel did it anyway. Many of the details are still disputed. The only one that isn't is that dozens of people, only 2 of whom were Hamas targets, were killed. The International Court of Justice had issued an order for Israel to halt any strikes on Rafah just days earlier. Israel admits that the area struck was not included in the list of locations in Rafah where civilians had been told to evacuate. Prime Minister Netanyahu said the civilian deaths were a tragic mishap. But as with every so-called tragic mishap in this war, nothing much has changed. The red line seems to move at Israel's beck and call. This weekend, President Biden outlined details for a ceasefire plan, which he said had Israel's backing.
For the past several months, my negotiators of foreign policy, intelligence community, and like have been relentlessly focused, not just on a ceasefire that would inevitably be fragile and temporary, but on a durable end of the war. That's been the focus, a durable end of this war. One that brings all the hostages home, ensures Israel's security, creates a better day after in Gaza without Hamas in power, and sets the stage for a political settlement that provides a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. For months, people all over the world have called for ceasefire. Now it's time to raise your voices and demand that Hamas come to the table, agrees to this deal, and ends this war that they began.
On this, the president is surely right. It is time for the war to end. Civilians in Gaza need more aid and need it fast. Israel needs to bring its hostages home. The watching world needs to see a credible plan for the security and rights of Gaza beyond the bloodshed, and that cannot surely include Hamas. Netanyahu responded by appearing to distance himself from that plan, saying that Israel's conditions have not changed. He's now routinely embarrassing the President of the United States by ignoring pretty much everything he says. But the time has come for Israel to listen to its top allies. Killing innocent civilians as they cower in refugee camps, whether intentional or otherwise, cannot be tolerated. And make no mistake, Hamas is a genocidal terror network whose wicked goal is the eradication of the Israeli state. But once again, I find myself asking, how much further can this go before Israel is guilty of the very terror it's supposed to be fighting? Well, in a moment, we'll be debating this with Wajahat Ali and Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. But first, I'm joined by Ambassador Majed Bamya, the Deputy Permanent Observer of the State of Palestine to the United Nations. Well, welcome to you, Ambassador. Let me start by asking you this question. Do you see any future for Gaza after this war that includes Hamas in any form of power?
So it's for Palestinians to choose their governments, and what we saw from the Israeli response to the Biden speech is the wish to continue the war, continue killing civilians, continue in its attempt to designate who it wants to govern Gaza under their own authority and its ability to continue invading and occupying our land. That is not possible. The future we see is one where we have a real prospect for Palestinian freedom, and that our people will be offered finally that right and that choice. And we are confident that our people as a whole will adhere to that choice.
I mean, with respect, the question I ask you is whether you think it would be right for Hamas to hold any power, not what the Palestinian electorate might think. But what do you think?
I think that you have a Palestinian government that should have authority over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, including East Jerusalem. And I think that Israel has done everything to undermine the Palestinian leadership and government that are willing to make peace as long as the occupation ends. Israel considers that the existential threat is the Palestinian state, and that is a big mistake that has led to all this ordeal. It's Palestinian freedom who will bring shared peace and security to our region.
Okay, but by Palestinian government, you mean the Palestinian Authority, or do you mean Palestinian Authority on the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza?
I mean the PLO and the Palestinian Authority.
Okay, so you agree then that Hamas can have no leadership role going forward in any governmental sense in Gaza?
I disagree with the fact that we're ignoring Israel's responsibilities, and I disagree with
I'm going to come to that, but I'm just asking you directly.
Okay,
it seems to me you've already answered the question.
State of Palestine, the State of Palestine is represented by its institutions who are committed to international law and who are committed to a two-state solution in which an independent and free state of Palestine lives side by side with Israel.
Okay, but just to be clear, that can't involve Hamas in any governmental role.
You know, you keep saying Hamas.
Because they're the current government of Gaza.
I keep telling you that there is a Palestinian government that is ready to take up its responsibility tomorrow if it is allowed to do so.
Yeah, but the government in Gaza remains Hamas until it changes, right?
And you think that Israel had a problem with that, or that Israel?
No, I'm asking you whether you think Hamas should have any governmental role going forward. You don't seem to want to answer the question.
I'm answering it. I think a single Palestinian government, which is the one recognized by the international community, which with the state of Palestine.
Right, but why are you reluctant to say it can't include Hamas?
Because we're proposing to have a Hamas within the Palestine Liberation Organization as long as they are committed to the platform of the Palestine Liberation Organization.
Why should, all right, so now you want, so you're saying you want,
people,
all right, so you want Hamas to be part of it.
People.
Right, but if you're Israel, why on earth would you allow any peace deal to resolve this war if people like yourself, senior members of the Palestinian side, come out and say, actually, we think Hamas should be part of a government going forward? Hamas are the people who committed one of the worst terror acts in history. They killed 1,200 people. They wounded nearly 7,000 more. They kidnapped 250 people, including babies and Holocaust survivors. They can have no role in any future government of either Gaza or the West Bank. You must surely understand that. Otherwise, why would Israel ever accept a peace deal?
Let me challenge your premise, and let me challenge the prejudice behind it. Because this is, we have to deal with
prejudice against terrorists.
No, I think there's I'm not saying only you. I think there's a general prejudice of tolerance, or a relatively high level of tolerance when Palestinians are killed and no tolerance when Israelis are killed. I think there's always justifications. Oh, you know, the Israelis had to endure the 7th of October when no justification could be given to the suffering that the people have endured before the 7th of October or after the 7th of October. That's a general prejudice where we are not considered as equals. If we have to deal with the people who are now massacring our nation, who have killed 36,000 people, including a majority of women and children, if the Israeli government today has extremists within its ranks, and still the world wants us to find a certain way of remaining peaceful and finding ways to peace, I mean, you have to accept that we deal with our society in its complexity and diversity, and we need to convince people, not kill them. We need to find a way to convince people on both ends that peace is the way forward. And if you are able to justify Israeli militarism, then you cannot demand Palestinian pacifism. We are coherent with ourselves. We call to end the cycle of violence. It's not to address the root cause of violence, which is the Israeli occupation, and to make peace. And then we don't think it would be relevant to which faction you belong. We believe the Palestinian people will adhere to that vision as long as they see a path to it. And the fact we keep talking about Hamas, instead of talking of these realities, I want to have a thoughtful, mindful conversation with you. It's not a got you moment that you're going to get here. We are very clear about the principles we adhere to. We don't have a finger on the trigger. The Israeli government has its finger on the trigger. We are not killing Israelis. The Israeli government is killing Palestinians. That's not a group in Israel. That's the government of Israel. Today, you have a recognized Palestinian government. You have a recognized Palestinian leadership who says it is ready to make peace now, based on the two-state solution and the international consensus, based on international law. And Israel is rejecting it. You can say Hamas 300 times. It doesn't change that reality. They had a partner for peace. They did everything to undermine it. They want to sow division among our ranks. They want to create civil conflict among our ranks. And we're not going to play into their hands to justify their assault and their massacres against our people by saying Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. That doesn't work. They are an occupying power. They have responsibilities. They have obligations. and know their violence. Not a single piece of their violence is justified. If we are demanded in the face of 7,000 Palestinians killed in 15 years to remain peaceful, then Israel should have been peaceful after the 7th of October and found a way to end this conflict once and for all, where nobody will be held captive, where no civilian would be harmed, where the occupation would end, and two states would live side by side.
You see, a lot of what you said, I agree with. You know, I do think you've got to get to a two-state solution. They've got to live peacefully side by side. It has to be a political solution in the end, as all these things are. My issue is if I'm on the Israeli government side and I see senior Palestinians advocating for Hamas to be part of a government going forward, you can't ignore Hamas. Hamas are the people who perpetrated the massacre, and that was an existential threat to Israel. Hamas's stated charter is the eradication of Israel. They make no pretense about it. They want to destroy Israel. So why should Israel allow, going forward, notwithstanding a lot of the valid criticism you make about what Israel has done by way of its response, and I can come to that in a moment, but notwithstanding that, you can't just remove Hamas from the equation. The moment Israel thinks Hamas is forming part of a government going forward in a post-war Gaza, it's a non-starter.
First, I said clearly, anybody willing to adhere to the platform of the PLO, which is in line with international law and UN resolutions, and a Palestinian state on 67 borders next to Israel. So there are criteria to our ability to work together in that stance. But again, you're ignoring the Israeli platform. You have an Israeli prime minister who people welcome and talk to.
Well, you haven't asked me what I think about that. Why don't you ask me?
Asking you. I'm saying,
you might get pleasantly surprised, because I happen to agree with you that the Israeli government right now seems to have been completely overrun with extremist ideology, you know, from Smotrich and Ben-Gvir to Netanyahu. Yes.
But do you agree with me? Do you agree with me?
Yes.
They're not treated the same way.
I do. I do. I don't think Netanyahu should remain in power after this war. I don't think his more right-wing lunatic element in his government should remain in power.
Do you think he should be killed? Should Smotrich be killed? Should Ben-Gvir be killed? Should all these Israeli generals committing massacres against us be killed? Should we respond? Should we leave unanswered the killing of 36,000 Palestinians, the destruction of the entirety of Gaza, the colonization, the settlers, violence against our people, the displacement of communities? Should we leave all that unanswered? How our people are going to be secure? Don't we have a right to safety? Don't we have civilians that should be protected?
Yes, you do.
Exactly. So if you apply the rationale that you have applied, and the media has applied, and the governments around the world have applied on the 7th of October, then we could justify violence, very strong violence against the Israelis.
But it sounds to me,
and we came and
it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ambassador, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like you're trying to find a way of justifying what Hamas did on October the 7th. That it was part of the so-called resistance, that because of previous violence.
I'm not, listen, there's the limit. You have to draw a limit somewhere. Harming civilians is the limit. It applies to everyone. Harming civilians
but you do condemn what Hamas did.
You see, so we're going to go down that line of questioning again.
Yes.
And I'll take this, since we have a bit of time. Usually we try to, answer.
I'm not trying to gotcha you. I think you've made a lot of very good points.
No. Since you're giving me the time, let me explain why you didn't get anyone to answer that question, if you allow me to.
Well, no, some people did. Some people did.
I told you, no, I mean, again, let me try and explain. If we had adhered to that line of questioning, the first question would be, would you condemn what happened on the 7th of October? Whatever you say, yes or no, the questioning is not going to end. If you say yes, then they're going to ask you, do you consider it as terrorism? If you say yes or no, that line of questioning is going to continue. And by the time you're done, the interview is done, and you haven't spoken of the ordeal of our people, and you have somehow found yourself justifying the Israeli response to it. I do not accept a terrorism framing. I'm very clear with you. I reject a terrorism framing. In the UN, I'm a jurist.
How would you frame it?
I will tell you. There is no definition of terrorism. And the reason is you have countries who came from decolonization.
Well, it's the killing of innocent civilians for political gain.
There's no definition. You can check.
Well, that is a definition.
There's no agreed upon. No, that's your definition. There's no.
No, that is the definition.
let me get to you'll get the point that I'm making. Again,
Okay.
I'm a very blunt person.
Okay.
I'm a very blunt
No, I
person. I'm not
appreciate
scared
that.
of any question.
So am I.
And I can respond to any question you have. The reason why states cannot agree on a definition is that people don't want struggles against colonialism, liberation, apartheid, etc., to be painted as terrorism, and thus, by confusing the justness of the means you are using and the justice of the cause you are defending, to delegitimize these struggles. And then you have on the other side states, including in the Western Bloc, including Israel, who say a state can do anything, can do exactly what you just defined, and can never be accused of terrorism, because terrorism can only be done by armed groups, not states. That's why at the UN till now, we have agreed on everything except the definition of terrorism. The terrorism framing means you have to kill the terrorists. That's the only way out. If you accept a conflict framing, then you need to end the conflict. That's how you resolve the violence once and for all. Israel wants to replace the conflict framing by a terrorism framing, and then wants to expand the definition of who's a terrorist to anybody in the Palestinian people. How many times they said Palestinian prisoners are terrorists? We had 1 million prisoners in 70 years. So all of our people are terrorists. They call our diplomacy terrorists. They call our NGOs, the most prominent human rights NGOs, terrorists. Now they're calling the UN terrorist supporter, and they want to make the UNRWA terrorists. So once we accept that framing, we've set the stage for the indiscriminate killing of Palestinians. This is an occupation. It doesn't mean that you can harm Israeli civilians when I say that. There's no right to resistance that allows you to harm civilians. That's not the way the international law works, and we are abiding by international law. But it means that the solution is not to kill more people. It is to break the cycle of violence. It is to sit and make a peace agreement that liberates the Palestinian people and ensures the peace and security for all. That is the only way out. And you have to recognize the humanity of the other. And for many reasons, personal, that we will not dwell into, I am immune to hatred. There are reasons in my personal story that makes me immune to hatred. And I'm far away, and I'm privileged, and I haven't suffered much of the suffering my people have suffered. If you could see into my soul the level of anger that takes every fiber of my being so it doesn't turn into hatred that would misguide me or rage that would blind me, I can understand how people can go crazy seeing their kids killed, seeing people under the rubble having to be displaced from one place to the other, being bombed, besieged, starved to death, and the world still demanding of them that you should do something different. Israel will kill Palestinians, whether they're peaceful, whether they're violent, whether they're tall or small. They will continue killing Palestinians because what they reject is our identity, is our nationhood, is our statehood. And they're not being very discreet about it if you just listen to them.
Ambassador, I appreciate you joining me and being so frank. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I'm joined now by the host of the Democracy-ish podcast, the commentator and columnist Wajahat Ali, and Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, the Israel Special Foreign Ministry envoy and former deputy mayor of Jerusalem. Well, let me start with you, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. I mean, that was powerful stuff there from the ambassador. What's your reaction to what he said?
Well, half of it is lies or delusions. And again, everybody wants to look at this in a very narrow scope of what happened since October 7th, which we are still suffering that trauma of those atrocities. We still have 124 people. Every day we're discovering dead young people from the concerts. We have a 1-year-old child, there a 4-year-old child. But I want to go further back. 2005, Israel left the Gaza Strip unilaterally in order to give the Palestinians that chance of what they said they wanted. They wanted autonomy, they wanted self-determination, they wanted a state. And let's say that it wasn't a state, it was a statelet. And look what happened. This man who just spoke, his party Fatah were brutally removed in 2006 from the Gaza Strip by Hamas, who took over and since haven't had an election. That's been 17 years. Now, the people who live under the Hamas umbrella, they're doing great. And the people who don't live a miserable life. There's, of course, no rights for women. 12-year-old girls are married off. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Now, since 2005, every year we've had a war with Gaza, almost every year. Rockets. Why are they firing rockets if we left that strip for them? And it goes back to what you mentioned to your speaker. which is the Charter of Hamas is not a two-state solution. Hamas is from the river to the sea, the destruction not just of Israel, but of all the Jews in the world. And if all the Jews happen to be in Israel, even better, more convenient. But let's look at the PA as well. And let's look at why we're in this mess to begin with. The Palestinians have rejected statehood 5 times, from the 1930s to then on to the Oslo Accords, to 2001, when Ehud Barak offered them. They're talking about the 1967 lines. That's exactly what Ehud Barak offered Yasser Arafat. And instead of saying yes, he goes to the streets and releases suicide bombers and maims and kills innocent people in the streets of Jerusalem, my city. Now, let's say you're not happy with that deal. Let's say you're almost there. You're about to get a state, but you're not agree with this or that. Wouldn't you go back to the negotiating table if that's what you really want? You start an urban warfare? Move forward. 2005, Israel leaves the Gaza Strip. 2009, another peace deal offered by Ehud Olmert, going even further than Ehud Barak, and them saying no again. So my conclusion is, and the conclusion of a lot of people in this country who are fatigued by this attempt that they are saying that they want a state, is that the crux of the problem is not that there isn't a Palestinian state. The crux of the problem is that there's a Jewish state that they have never ideologically accepted exists. And in their educational system, he talks that they want peace. Why are they paying terrorist pensions? He talks that they want peace. Why is in the educational system talk about the right to return and the destruction of the state of Israel? If that's what they want, why are they telling the people exactly the opposite?
Okay. Let me bring in Wajahat Ali. You've been waiting very patiently. I mean, there's a question in that, which I think is a very valid one, which I also asked the ambassador. He seems to think that you can have post-war a situation where Hamas still form part of a government, governing in Gaza, for example. I just don't think Israel's ever going to wear that, and I completely understand why they would feel that way, and I'd agree with them. Do you think it's possible to have Hamas as forming any part of a government in Gaza after this?
The year is 2024. Israel has occupied Palestinians in East Jerusalem, in West Bank, and in Gaza for nearly 60 years. In the West Bank, there is no Hamas. Hamas does not control it. What is Israel's excuse? Over 500 people have died. No one's talking about that right now because of the genocide in Gaza. They have expanded settlements. Palestinians live under apartheid law. You know this. In Gaza, over the past 7 months, Piers, over 36,000 people have died. You and I have seen it. You and I have been outraged by it. You and I have seen the burned bodies in Rafah. Over 80,000 people have been injured. Over 1.5 million people have been displaced. As long as there is an occupation, even if you get rid of Hamas, and as we have seen in the past 7-8 months, Hamas will not be destroyed. They have been weakened, but Israel has already failed in its war because, as we have seen, Hamas will not be destroyed. Even if Hamas gets destroyed, something else will pop up. I'll give you an example. Early 80s, Lebanon. They went to Lebanon. Israel went to Lebanon, laid devastation. What happened? PLO got weakened. What rose in its place, Piers? You remember, Hezbollah. Who has been supporting Hamas, specifically as a counter to Arab nationalism? Israeli government. Who has been supporting and funding Hamas? Benjamin Netanyahu. So who here the ICC has said has committed war crimes? Netanyahu and the leaders of Hamas. The reality is, unfortunately, as much as all of us hate Hamas, and we do, it has committed terrorism against Israel. Right now, the problem is the occupying power, occupying Palestinians. And I will say this, Israel should call out Hamas's bluff. Hamas said, if Israel accepts 2 states, we will lay down our arms. All right, call Hamas's bluff. Last month, Hamas said, we accept Qatar and Egypt's peace plan. Antony Blinken said it was very, very generous. Who torpedoed it? Netanyahu. We just saw on Friday, President Biden, who has been weakened, humiliated, and mocked and ridiculed by his greatest ally, more like an enemy, Netanyahu, the next day, Saturday, Piers, who rejected Israel's own peace plan? Netanyahu. So I'm telling you, as long as Israel occupies Palestinians and Israel chooses to occupy Palestinians, and Netanyahu and the government say no 2 states, there will always be resistance. That's the reality we have to deal with, unfortunately.
Okay, bring Fleur back in here. I mean, I don't think Hamas should form part of any government after this. I think they abrogated their right to govern anything, frankly, but what happened on October the 7th. But I also think that Israel's current government is full of people who are, I would label, extremists, whether it's Smotrich or Ben-Gvir, or even increasingly Netanyahu himself, who, let's not forget, is facing corruption charges the moment this war's over. all the polling says that Israelis support the war on Hamas, but don't want him to continue as prime minister at the end of it. There's no motivation for him to end this war. In fact, the motivation is quite the opposite. And it's quite clear from the rhetoric of people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir that they speak in virtual genocidal terms themselves. So yeah, I'm all in favor of Hamas being removed completely from any power. But I don't understand why any sensible person on the Israeli side would see that it would be good for anything going forward, particularly a two-state solution, to have people like Netanyahu, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir anywhere near a government. What do you say to that?
Well, the thing is, Piers, we're a democracy. And democracies, we have elections. Just because Hamas had an election and the PA haven't had an election in, 19 years? Hamas haven't had an election in 17 years? We have elections. The people speak and they elect the leaders that they want. But it's very, very interesting how everybody's putting the blame on Netanyahu and this government when previous governments, some on the left, also were rejected. Also, the Palestinian leadership rejected statehood. What was the excuse then? Why don't we ask ourselves, what is the fundamental reason why Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas have said no to very generous peace deals? What is the reason why Hamas have rejected now a ceasefire deal 5 times? Blinken did say that the deals were very generous, but it was Hamas who rejected it. And then they magically accepted a deal that we didn't even offer. And again, trying to manipulate the media. And so again, the question is not this government. It's very easy to blame this government right now. They're an easy target. What was the problem with the Ehud Barak government? What was the problem with the Ehud Olmert government? What was the problem with the Rabin government?
Well, they didn't kill nearly 40,000 Palestinians in 8 months.
First of all, please, Piers, we know that the numbers have gone up and down like yo-yos. Even the UN said last week that it wasn't already 35,
how many do you think have been killed?
That it was 20. All I can say to you is
how many do you think have been killed?
We have, I would say, potentially around 20,000, because that's what the UN
you have
said,
no idea.
22,000.
You have no idea.
Let's not start with this line of questioning.
Actually, I'm going to start with this line of questioning.
I don't think Churchill knew in the middle of the Second World War how many Germans he'd killed. And so this is a farcical question. What I can tell you is
you just gave me a number, but you've no idea why you've got that number.
That's what the UN says. The UN says, according to the so-called Gaza Health Ministry, let's take their number. Let's take the number, the mistaken, corrected number of the Gaza so-called Health Ministry, all terrorists underground, hiding like cowards. But let's say now they're saying 22,000. We know we've killed 14,000 terrorists.
No, you don't.
Now you tell me.
Don't.
Yes, we do.
No, you
yes,
don't.
we do. So you tell me.
No,
we know
I'm
how
sorry.
many
I'm not
brigades
having
we've
that.
gotten rid of.
I pressed
we
the Israeli.
know how many brigades.
Hang on.
We know how many brigades we've gotten rid of. We know how many
Hang on.
brigades
I'm going
are
to
left.
respond to you. I did put
We know
this.
how many brigades.
I put this to an Israeli government spokesman. I asked him, how many Hamas have you killed? And he gave me this figure. And I said, how many civilians have you killed? And he had no idea. I said, well, then how can you be so precise about how many terrorists you've killed? You can't. If you've got no idea how many civilians you've killed, why should I believe a word about the numbers of Hamas?
Because we know how many brigades they have, because we have that intelligence. We know how many brigades
so just to be clear,
in different
just
places.
to be clear, you know exactly how many terrorists you've killed, but you have no idea how many civilians.
We estimate, absolutely, we estimate that there's about 14,000 terrorists, which we've gotten rid of. We know how many are left. There's 4 brigades, and that's why we're in Rafah.
And how many civilians have you killed?
And the UN, again, Piers, in the middle of the Second World War, I don't think you could have
Wow,
pushed Churchill
you're doing it as well.
to ask him.
Sorry,
What
Fleur.
am I doing?
You're doing the same thing the government spokesman did.
Absolutely
You know
not.
exactly
It
how
is
many
a
terrorists you've killed, but you've no idea how many civilians.
We don't know exactly.
How convenient.
We don't know exactly.
How convenient that Israel knows exactly how many terrorists you've killed, but you've no idea how many innocent women and children.
Do you believe the UN numbers?
Huh?
Do you believe the UN numbers?
I just find it staggering that you'll all come on and say to me, we know we've killed 14,126 Hamas, but we've no idea how many civilians.
Because we know what the army that we're dealing with is. We know what the terrorist
army
army
sorry,
that
it's
we're dealing with
nonsense
is.
to say you can count one and not the other.
Absolutely not. It's nonsense to even ask the question. I don't know who in the middle of a war starts counting here. Counting the people that they've killed.
You're counting.
No, we know how many are left.
Sorry, you're counting, but you're only counting one side.
Piers, you seem to be a little obsessed with this.
Yeah,
counting
I'm
of
obsessed with
numbers.
how many civilians are being killed.
All right, let's say we take the so-called Gaza Health Ministry's numbers, the corrected version. Do you remember what that is now?
That was the number of people they could actually put a name to, right?
The corrected
They could put a name
version.
to.
So we went
And you think that's the total number of civilians killed?
The last time I was on your show, you had Barghouti saying that there was 40, 50, 60,000 dead. Let's just add numbers on, because why not? Everybody will believe you anyway. And then we had the corrected version of the numbers, which went down to about 22, 24,000.
They were the names of people. They were the ones they could put a name to. They don't know how many people are lying in rubble still. They've no idea. People have been killed.
We know how many.
People have been killed in gigantic numbers week in, week out. You know that, and I know that. I've interviewed doctors. I've interviewed doctors in hospitals saying 500 people are being brought in every single day. But what staggers me, Fleur, what staggers me is that you, like the government spokesman I interviewed, you are certain you know exactly how many terrorists you're killing, but you've no idea how many civilians. Let me bring you Wajahat.
We know how big the army. We know how big. Let me finish.
No, I'm going to come to Wajahat. I've given you a chance to respond.
When Al-Shifa Hospital
can't just keep talking.
When Al-Shifa Hospital was bombed by the Palestinians,
we're not going back again to that.
They said there were 500 dead. The next day, when it turned out to be a Hamas rocket, there were 26 dead.
I know.
Think about that every time you believe the numbers.
Yeah. Let me come to Wajahat. This is my problem with when I get into numbers with the Israeli side, is that they seem to be utterly emphatic in their knowledge of how many terrorists they're killing, but no idea how many civilians, and almost don't care. It's the fog of war. Churchill didn't count.
The fog of war was used by the UN, not us.
Well,
when they were
I'm asking Wajahat. Sorry,
when they were justifying the wrong numbers.
You could let him speak,
that
please.
That was their expression.
Let him speak, please. Wajahat.
It's not that they almost don't care, Piers. It's that they don't care. And we know that the number is probably higher than 36,000 people killed. You and I have eyes. The world has eyes. We have seen Rafah get bombed. We have seen the charred bodies. We have seen Israel bomb churches, mosques, refugee camps. We have seen Israel kill the staff of World Central Kitchen and then say, oops, we have seen Israel occupy Palestinians in the West Bank. There's no Hamas in the West Bank. What's Israel's excuse for killing over 500 people in the West Bank? With Ben-Gvir handing out, excuse me, with Ben-Gvir handing out weapons to extremist settlers.
You're deluded.
Listen,
if you think there's
of course
no
you know,
West Bank.
But to you, can I just say, but to you, Hamas doesn't control the West Bank. Facts, please. But to you, every Palestinian is a terrorist. You don't care about the women. You don't care about the children. You don't care about the majority of people that have been killed are civilians. To you, it's all terrorists.
You don't know anything. You just accuse
I can
Israel,
judge you by. Can I just finish? I let you. I didn't say a word.
Can you let him finish his point?
I didn't say a word.
You can't keep talking over him, Fleur. Let him finish his point.
He's lying.
First of all,
well, he listened to you. So let him speak.
This is what I say: is she represents the general psychopathy of the Israeli government, where they come on television and they think the rest of the world actually is like them, that they don't see Palestinians as humans, and they say these talking points. And Piers, sometimes when you invite me to debate, I sit here and go, I don't have to say a word, because they're undermining themselves and their own cause in front of the global stage right now. I mean, the fact that she knows, but like somehow magically, they're all terrorists, but when you ask them repeatedly, well, how can you not know how many civilians there are? And they say, well, we don't know. What civilians? And then she goes to World War II, compares Palestinian moms and children to Germans, to Nazis. Okay, fine. Go for it.
You're talking about mosques, and you're talking about churches, and you're talking about schools, and you fail to mention that that's exactly where Hamas hide. Not just that, they build mosques on top of tunnels, on top of terrorist installations. You want to ignore the fact that Hamas are cynically using their own people. They use their people as a defense strategy. They're using our hostages
so
as
Israel
a defense
bombs
strategy.
Rafah and kills kids? So Israel bombs World Central Kitchen staff?
Israel bombed 2 terrorists. A kilometer away, there was a fire that was made by munitions that were in a place that they shouldn't have been. And
actually, you don't know all that.
There is
you don't know that. That's not been established as fact.
There is an ongoing investigation.
Sorry, that's not.
Now,
sorry.
But all I know is
again to correct you, Fleur. That has not.
You don't know what happened either.
No, nor do you. So you accept you don't.
We are at the moment
Sorry,
investigating.
you just accepted you don't.
We know that it was a kilometer away from where
you just said you didn't know what happened either. In other words, nor do you.
No, we are. We are doing an investigation.
Right, it's not
because Israel is
concluded.
the
So how
country
can you
of
say these
law
things
and
are
order.
facts?
And then
I'm
The only fact,
Piers can ask, then why did
if I may
Netanyahu
finish,
apologize?
if I may
Israel
finish,
is
if I may finish,
indiscriminately
Fleur,
bombing children.
if I may
That is
finish,
wrong.
if I may finish, the only fact is that 45 innocent people in the refugee camps were killed at the same time as apparently 2 Hamas terrorists. I don't call that a very good percentage, do you?
No, but it wasn't a strategy, and it is not what
But when
we
you
aim
bomb a
to do.
refugee
Whereas
camp,
Hamas
that
on
is
the
a
October
strategy.
7th,
When you bomb a refugee camp,
no,
it is a strategy.
We did not bomb a refugee camp. We bombed 2
Who are in a
terrorists.
refugee camp?
No, they were a kilometer away from the humanitarian
They were
zone.
in a refugee camp.
They were a kilometer away from the humanitarian
In
zone.
a refugee camp.
Where we moved people in order to put
You
them out
moved
of
them
harm's
there
way.
and then you killed
Whereas
them.
Hamas keeps them in harm's way. When babies were baked in ovens on October 7th, that was a strategy. When Israel tries to weed out the terrorists, and there are unfortunately casualties, it's not a strategy. That is not what we aim to do.
Those
But
casualties
Hamas
are
knows
beheaded
very
babies in
well
Rafah.
that really?
Yes,
That bomb
really.
dropped
I've
in
seen
Rafah tent,
I
it
saw a
burned
beheaded
bodies
baby
and
that
babies
night.
were
It was
beheaded.
horrific.
That's what happened in Rafah.
Really?
And you know why they went to Rafah, Piers?
So hang on,
Can we
you're
connect it real quick?
Fleur,
Can we
hang
connect
on,
the
Fleur,
dots?
don't
hang on.
accept it.
Fleur, just to
I
be
would need
clear,
some
are you
proof.
denying that there were any video footage of a baby beheaded?
I have not seen anything.
Really?
And I know that the Israeli army would never do anything like that.
No, sorry, the baby's head was blown off.
Oh, okay. Listen, when
It's
there's a
killed
bomb...
36,000 Palestinians.
Oh, well, that's what you say. Apparently, you know the numbers better than the UN and
The fire
the
that
army
raged through
and
that
everyone
refugee
else
camp did that damage
was
to that
tragic.
baby.
was absolutely, and it was tragic.
But it's going to happen again and again if you bomb people in a
Yes.
refugee camp.
Well, we weren't aiming to bomb people in a
But
refugee
you
camp.
are
We were
going to
aiming
kill them
to
if you keep
eliminate
dropping
2
bombs
terrorists with
in a
blood
refugee
on their
camp, aren't
hands.
you? You're going to
That's
kill
why
civilians.
We took almost 1 million people and put them in a humanitarian
And how many
zone.
have you left?
That's why we did.
How many have you left?
Which army in the world is actually warning ahead of time where we're going to be attacking in order to put people out of harm's way that its own authority, its own government puts in harm's way? Nobody's doing that. War
Where
is
are they
ugly.
going to run
War
to
is
over a
horrible.
I'm sorry,
War
I have to
is
say
horrible.
something.
Where
I have to
would
say
they
something.
run to?
Where
Well, maybe
are
the
they going
brethren,
to run to
maybe
when?
Egypt.
Just let me finish.
Maybe somebody should demand Egypt to
I
help
have
out here.
listened to you. Just give me 10 seconds. The Israeli government has bombed Gaza. There's over 1.5 million people displaced. They moved to Rafah for safety. What did Israel do? Cross Biden's red line, the greatest ally, United States, and bombed Rafah. These people, as Piers were saying, were in a safe space. They were in a safe zone, in a refugee camp, and now we have charred bodies and beheaded babies, and Benjamin Netanyahu says, I don't care. No ceasefire. I'm going to continue bombing Rafah. And now you have openly admitted they should go to Egypt. Now, if you want to send them to Egypt, which I know you do
Egypt
because you
could
just said it,
help out.
that is
Look
ethnic
what happened in the
cleansing.
Ukrainian
That
war.
is
No,
ethnic
it's
cleansing.
not.
And that
No, it's not.
is a genocide.
No, why is
that
it
would be a
ethnic
genocide.
cleansing? That's so you're saying that at the moment
Because
there's
you're
no
bombing
genocide.
them
Well,
out.
At least that. Okay. All I can say to you is this: Ukraine had a war, and all of the neighboring countries took them in temporarily in order to help them out in a situation where there is bombing going on. Now, Egypt has a border with Rafah, with Gaza. Now, not only are they not helping out, even temporarily, taking people out of harm's way, they built 3 walls, and it was discovered that 50 tunnels that were smuggling in arms
Because
from
it's Israel's
Egypt.
responsibility. Israel is the occupying
No.
power. Why should Egypt help?
We are not-
Israel
why are
should
we
stop
occupying?
killing
We left in
Palestinians.
2005.
It is your responsibility.
We left
It is your
2005.
responsibility. You are the
Why
occupying power. Why do you want
Where?
to kick out
Where are we the
Palestinians to
occupying-
Egypt? And by the way,
where are
do you
we
think
the occupying
do
power?
you think Palestinians will be allowed to return in Netanyahu's Israel, where he says there's no 2 states? Do you think Ben Gvir and Smotrich will allow these Palestinians that you care so much about, that you're going to move out to Egypt and Jordan? Do you think that the government of Netanyahu, your government, will you allow these refugees to come back? You know, all these hundreds of thousands of refugees that you've allowed to come back over the past 7 years? What would happen? Do you think they really will be allowed to come back to your Israel?
Listen, we never left. We left in 2005, and we pulled out 8,000 people and their businesses and farms not to come back. Why did we do that? Why did we go through all of that trauma?
And you're still
of pulling
occupying.
up people? No, why are we occupying? Because we tried to stop Iranians from sending arms to Gaza? Another myth, another lie. We left in 2005.
If you let, okay, let me ask you this.
We left the
Let me ask
Palestinian
you
leadership
this.
to their own
Let me
devices.
ask you
And
this.
look what happens.
Let me ask
And
you this.
Look what happens.
Let me,
Piers,
Fleur,
every
please
time
stop
we try
talking.
land for
If I'm
peace,
asking a
look what
question,
happens.
my question
Look
is
what
this.
happens.
My question is this. If there's no
Yeah.
occupation, how is it that at the start of this war, Israel was able to turn off a lot of the water into Gaza, a lot of the food into Gaza, a lot of the energy into Gaza? If you're not an occupying country, how are you able to do that to another country?
A blockade is not an occupation.
What is
Piers.
it?
And a blockade is not an occupation.
What is it?
Legally, a blockade is
What
not.
is it?
Well, first of all, there was trade going on between Gaza and Israel before October 7th. We gave out 20,000 work permits. People were working all across.
Why are
the Gaza
Palestinians not
envelope.
entitled to the same rights as Israelis?
They had their own state.
They don't have the rights of Israelis. Why not?
Because they're not Israelis.
Okay. Well, that's pretty conclusive.
Thank you.
They're not Israelis.
Okay.
We left in
Sometimes,
2005.
you know what?
Look, Piers,
Sometimes
they can't have
it's
it
good to
both
shine a
ways.
light because you get the right
can't-
answer.
No, let me tell you what light I'm shining. You can't have it both ways. You want to be Israeli, or do you want to have your own state? You want to have your own autonomous territory?
I
or do
think
you want to be part of
Palestinians
Israel?
want to have the same.
94%
Palestinians want to have the
Palestinians
same
in the-
rights as Israelis, and I don't see why they shouldn't.
But do they want their own state, or don't they? Do they want to be part of Israel? Do they want a one-state solution, or do they want a two-state solution?
Well,
What
let
do
me
they
ask.
want?
Okay, that's a fair enough question.
I'm asking.
That's a fair question. Let me put it to Wajahat. What do you want?
What do they want?
Wajahat, what do you want at the end of this?
At the end of this, I want justice, I want peace, and I want a pathway towards Palestinian self-determination. I think there has to be an end to the occupation. Israel is occupying Palestinians to its detriment. I want to just say, those who are supporting the war like she is, here's the failure of Netanyahu's war, very quickly. Netanyahu said he wants to destroy Hamas. Hamas is not destroyed. Failure number one. Netanyahu says he wants the hostages back. The family members of the hostages are protesting Netanyahu because they know he doesn't care. Failure number two. He says he wants to make Israel safer. Israel's not safer. He wants to make the region safer. The region's not safer. He wants to help Israel's reputation. Israel's a pariah. Military solutions will not work. People like your guest right now think they could put the boot on the neck of Palestinians, create a symmetry where there is none, occupy people, and people resist that occupation and just die. Like they're just going to die. They're not. If you want an end, if you want peace, stop the occupation and give Palestinians a pathway towards self-determination. And if there should be two states, Piers, riddle me this. Why is Israel expanding settlements in the West Bank? What excuse is it? Please give us the excuse why Israel
could not agree
is
more.
occupying the West Bank and expanding
I
settlements.
couldn't agree more. Fleur, why on earth does Israel
it's
think it's a
wonderful
good
that-
idea to expand settlements on the West Bank?
Well, first of all, you have to understand the context that Area A and B, which is where 94% of the Palestinians live, are under the PA autonomy. The fact that they haven't developed their own economy, the fact that they don't give people anything, the fact that East Jerusalem...
That's not the
city where
question.
I
The
was
question is why
deputy
expand
Let me
settlements
answer.
knowing it is deeply inflammatory and often accompanied
Because-
by violence? Why?
Because the settlements are not the obstacle to a two-state solution.
Actually,
or
they're
to
one of
peace.
the major obstacles, actually, yeah.
They're not.
Because if you
Really,
keep
Piers?
seizing
So what was the
land
obstacle
They're taking
with
up all the land.
settlers who are violent
Piers,
towards Palestinians, that is an
Piers,
obstacle.
what
Yeah,
was-
it is.
What was the obstacle before 1967? The 48 declaration.
We're not in 1967. We're in
In
2024.
1967, a war was started. In 1967, a war was started in order to destroy Israel. In 1948, a war was started in order to destroy Israel. There wasn't one settlement. So explain to me what you
And in
both
2024,
are
Benjamin
ignoring.
Netanyahu
What you
announced he
both
would have
are
3,000
ignoring.
more settlements
What
in
you're
West
both
Bank.
The
ignoring.
settlements
Joe Biden said
are
no more settlements.
ridiculously
Netanyahu
inflammatory.
said
They
3,000
are
more
wrong.
settlements.
They shouldn't be happening.
The largest cities and towns in the Palestinian, in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria are all under the autonomy of Mahmoud Abbas, who unfortunately is a corrupt dictator. What I wish for the Palestinian people is that they get the leadership they deserve. They get a Gandhi, they get a Mandela, they get
Okay,
somebody
but
who's
you know-
not
okay.
either a kleptocrat
Okay,
or a
if
genocidal
you know
maniac.
what, hang
You'd
on.
kill
like
them.
Sinwar.
Hang on.
You'd kill them.
You know what?
No, we
You'd kill
wouldn't.
them.
Well,
bomb
you know
them.
what?
That's not true.
I actually
We
wish
are
that.
all-
If I
we're
may
all
finish,
wishing that here in Israel.
if I may finish, I actually agree with you, Fleur. I would like that on both sides. I think Netanyahu is long past his sell-by date. The right-wing headbangers in his government are past their sell-by date. To get to a two-state solution where people can live peacefully, with the same rights and same security and freedoms, you have got to get new leadership on both sides. And that is how we're going to leave.
Amen.
I wish I could believe Land for Peace would bring us peace, because we really want peace.
Okay, well, one said amen and the other one tried to equivocate. And that's the problem, Fleur. Sometimes you've got to reach an agreement on top line principles, which is, isn't that what we should all want?
With leaders who care about their people. And I wish that for the
On
Palestinians.
both sides. I don't care. I don't think Netanyahu and his cabinet right now care about anything but themselves.
We've had many other prime ministers offering everything the Palestinians said they wanted, and they rejected
We're going to leave it there. Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, thank you very much. Wajahat Ali, thank you very much. I appreciate it.